the glory of Jesus Christ.
From high snowy mountains to the sun-baked wilderness. Forests, meadows and quiet waters. The Dead Sea and the flowering desert. Animals from Europe, Asia and Africa, where 3 continents meet. This is the nature of the Holy Land. Dry and dusty, bleached by the centuries, the deserts of Israel lie silent and empty under the sun. In contrast to the fertile north of the country or the turbulent life of the River Jordan, this is a desolation. More than 70% of Israel is desert. Once great rivers flowed westward across these plains from the mountains of Jordan to the Mediterranean basin. But when the great African rift opened up, their flow stopped and then reversed. They began to run down into a huge depression, cutting deep canyons as they tumbled towards the lowest point on the Earth's surface. That was when the desert was born. It may look lifeless, but there is life here in abundance. The lordly ibex, monarch of the cliffs, is a master of desert survival. Leopards hunt among the rocks, numbering ibex among their prey. Where the sun beats down on ancient salt beds and it seems that nothing could survive, thorny-tailed lizards find a living. But like all the desert creatures, after thousands of years of solitude, they are coming into increasing contact with humanity and all its works. This, the lowest point on the Earth's surface, would seem to be the last place where people could have any effect on the natural order. Yet the Dead Sea, a vast and ancient pool of concentrated brine, has become a holiday resort, a place of recreation and healing. After an eternity of lonely silence, the desert is becoming crowded, filled with bustle and noise. The dawn of a new day, a morning in September, and the vultures are rousing themselves to look for food. Soon, when the ground warms up, thermals will lift them above the Dead Sea Valley. Nearby, white storks rest on their long migration to Africa. They too are waiting for the air to move. The most abundant mammal in the desert is the rock hyrax, often called by its biblical name the coney. Above it on the cliffs, an ibex gazes across a shimmering waste towards the undrinkable water at its heart. In the morning they come down from the cliffs to the beds of deep canyons. They know where there's water, and they alone can find their way down the nearly vertical rock walls. Sometimes even ibex have to be very cautious. There's rivalry between the adult males. The mating season is approaching. The young of the previous season are still in the care of their mothers, relying on them for protection and milk. The biblical David, author of the Psalms, went into hiding from King Saul in the wilderness near En-Gedi on the shores of the Dead Sea. This spring is named after him at the head of David's river. Beside it grow acacia and cordia trees and lush grass all the year round. It's a meeting and feeding place, not only for the ibex, but for hyraxes too, abandoning their rocky hiding places for an unaccustomed role as tree climbers. The trees provide shade as well as food, essential even to the best adapted inhabitants of this baking desert. There are about 700 ibex in the Judean desert, and about as many again in the whole of the rest of Israel. Once they were hunted for food, but now they're protected as an emblem of the wilderness. The ibex and hyrax are not alone at the spring. Among the birds that come down to it are little bee-eaters, hunting insects over the water and among the bushes. Tristram's grackle, a relative of the starlings, named after one of the great naturalists of the Holy Land, visits the date palms by the well. For there are palms here, and people to tend them and take the harvest. David's wilderness is greatly changed since his time, and the ibex are among those that reap the benefit. They feed on the fallen fruit, building up their strength for the coming winter. The date growers don't begrudge them their share. The ibex save them work by keeping the ground clear round the trees. Autumn is the time of the date harvest. They can grow here because some of the water from David's well, about 2/3 of the flow, is diverted for irrigation. As the day goes on, thermals, columns of warm air, begin to rise from the sun-baked rocks. The migrating storks use them to lift them clear of the cliffs that stand in the way of their journey south. One by one, the birds take off to join the circling flock. When they reach 400 meters above the water, they will be at what the rest of the world calls sea level. Male ibex fence with each other all through the year, using the gentle skirmishes to determine their place in the hierarchy of the herd. They also test the strength of their horns against trees and bushes. This exercise in the martial arts gradually becomes more vigorous as the autumn wears on. Soon the fights will become real, as the top few males decide which of their number are really in the first division. Ibex males fight only with others of their own size. Smaller animals beat a swift retreat before making contact, and wisely so. The fights require not only great strength, but technique, if one of the animals is not to be seriously hurt. The prize will be the right to mate with one of the herd's 3 or 4 groups of females. The horns are not just for clashing and thrusting, but for hooking together as well, in a trial of strength and determination. The loser will rarely fight long enough to be hurt. He will submit when he realizes that his opponent is too strong and too experienced for him to overcome. The younger of these two males, with the shorter beard and slightly lighter coat, is coming to that realization. Submission is not far away. For the winners in these contests, there remains one main task: to impregnate all the females in the group under their control as each comes into breeding condition. They follow them relentlessly, waiting for the right scent signal. Tongue protruding and eyes dilated, he concentrates solely on the female's condition. The male doesn't have it all his own way. The females must be receptive as well as in season. It's an arduous time. As well as serving all his mates, he must keep a sharp eye out for rival males who lost out in the eliminating bouts, but might still take the chance to sneak in while he's not looking. When evening comes, the herd leaves the valley to climb to the plateau for the night. Generations before them survived because they climbed to safety when the sun went down. At night, the valley is a hunting ground. Common spiny mice feed under cover of darkness, scouring the valley floor for seeds and small animals to eat. The Negev viper hunts at the same time. It only has to strike once. Its venom is strong enough to kill a mouse in a few minutes. The snake waits for the poison to take effect. The mouse is still alive, but only just. As soon as it stops moving, the viper swallows it whole. The snake is preparing to hibernate, and it must feed well to survive the winter. So must the surviving mice if their species is to carry on in the desert where it has lived for so long. Morning finds the scavengers tidying up after the night's hunting. Egyptian vultures have followed some desert crows to the carcasses of two calves killed by wolves during the hours of darkness. Crows are sometimes called the vultures' guides because they're usually first to find food. Unlike the larger birds, they don't have to wait for thermals to form before they can take to the wing. They must feed quickly. They will soon be migrating to Africa now that their breeding season is over. There is another reason. The griffon vultures will soon be here, and the little Egyptians are no match for the larger birds. One is not too much of a problem, but when they turn up in a mob, they simply take over, after some discussion amongst themselves. The crows have their own way of trying to move the griffins on. It's not very effective. The Egyptian vultures and the crows still wait hopefully for scraps, but it's too late. Once the griffins get over their squabbles, there's no room for anyone else at the table. A griffin vulture can eat more than a quarter of its body weight at a single sitting. It's no wonder that when the time comes for them to go, their takeoff is somewhat laboured. Once on the wing, though, they are masters of the air. The vultures soar over canyons that are dry for most of the year, but their great depth and steepness gives away their ancient secret. They once carried mighty rivers down into the valley. As the level of the Dead Sea fell, the rivers ran faster and cut deeper and deeper into the soft rock. Then the water supply ran out, and today they wait for rare rainfall in the Negev desert above. Along the sides of the canyons near the springs, weaver ants make their homes. Unlike their cousins in damper climates, they stick together not leaves, but sand grains. The rough, rocky walls are dotted with their burrows during the winter months. They spend the summer closer to the water, but as the weather cools down, they move about 20 meters up the slope to their winter quarters, rebuilding the entrance to an earlier nest. They use the same adhesive as their distant cousins, silk produced by their own larvae, which the workers handle like so many tubes of glue. They use the same silk to wrap their dead before carrying them to a communal cemetery. The reason for leaving their home beside the spring is not quite clear. Although the weather is cooler in November, the temperature rarely falls below a comfortable 18 degrees. And the colonies don't all move at once. The uphill migration is spread over a month. People say that the ants know that the rains are coming, but they may simply be responding to the first dampness in the ground after the rains begin. In addition to their well-practiced skill at building, weaver ants are known all over the world as masters of another trade. They're farmers. They keep their herds on bushes near their home. Groups of aphids, small plant-sucking bugs, sit placidly on the twigs while the ants caress them with their antennae. In response to this attention, the aphids excrete drops of a sweet substance known as honeydew, which the ants eat. They have been known to defend their herds from other insects, driving off raiders with concerted biting attacks. In return for a quiet life, the aphids lose nothing but their droppings. In December, the animals of the desert can expect rain, though the timing and the amount are uncertain. The highlands round the deep, dry valley are still parched in the winter sun. When the rain clouds gather and the thunder rolls, the land waits expectantly for the blessing from heaven. The first storm is a disappointment. It peters out before the ground is more than barely damp. No rain falls on the lower ground. The clouds evaporate as they cross the cliffs and drift into the heat of the valley. But the sand in the high desert turns to waterproof clay in even a light rainfall. Unable to soak in, the water floods the upper canyons, making them run something like the torrents they must have been long ages ago. A very damp desert fox has narrowly escaped drowning. All he can do now is wait for the waters to recede. Flash floods like this come more than once during most winters. For a few hours, the Dead Sea Valley is underwater. Then the stream in the middle will drain the valley as the sun dries the mud. Golden eagles start to build their nests during the rainy season in December. They choose sites high on the cliffs and use them year after year, adding to the pile of sticks and twigs as each season starts. Until very recently, these areas high above the valley floor were safe from any disturbance. But times are changing, for eagles as for all the other desert animals. Unlike birds of prey in most other parts of the world, they have no problem with pesticides and no shortage of food. But in a few weeks from now, events in the desert will conspire to make their life more complicated than it need be. Until then, though, they can concentrate on gathering nest material, stepping off the ledge into space as if they were getting into a lift. The eagles are easy to see as they glide and soar over the desert, but their numbers have declined since the mid-70s. There are now only 20 or 30 pairs nesting on the walls of the canyons winding down to the valley floor. And the valley floor is being transformed as January and February bring the spring. The drying ground bursts into flower, an explosion of colour that turns the desert into a garden for a few short weeks. About every 50 years, the rainfall is enough to trigger the germination of poppies on the valley floor, a miracle seen only twice this century. With the flowers come the animals that depend on them. Eggs of butterflies and moths lie dormant through months of drought to hatch in the first rains into caterpillars that must complete their life cycle before the sun once more desiccates the land. The striped hawk moth feeds at every flower it can find, sucking nectar to fuel its acrobatic flight and to build up its resources for egg laying. The eggs must be safely laid before the dry conditions return. It's not just wildflowers either. In the deserts today, nurseries grow flowers for the market, irrigated by water from deep artesian wells. The moth takes advantage of them too. The blooming spring brings out giant grasshoppers, ominously coloured in black and yellow, universal warning colours in the animal kingdom. The warning is justified. The males can squirt poison a metre or more through the air, enough to make a person blind for 3 or 4 days. The plant they feed on, Pergularia, is poisonous in every part. This is their mating season. The diminutive males climb aboard the female of their choice, kicking off rivals who try to displace them. They have longer than the moths to complete their life cycle because they don't depend on flowers, but they must do it in the 3 months while there are still green plants for them to feed on. By early May they will have laid their eggs, and then they will die in the drought. But the desert still has surprises before it reverts to a parched wilderness. Once or twice each year, the rain clouds penetrate as far as the Dead Sea, bringing about another miraculous reincarnation. White snails have spent the summer below ground, dormant among the roots of plants. When rain arrives, they come briefly to life, climbing up the plant stems to feed. The canyons send torrents leaping over the cliffs down towards the Dead Sea. The streams eat at the soft rock of the cliffs, stripping away the silt and carrying it into the sea. The fresh water floats briefly on the brine, dyeing the sea in the colours of the land, while the sky is painted with rainbows. Desert swallows can fly miles to find water, but the white snails must wait until it comes to them. When it does, they feed hurriedly, mate and lay their eggs before retreating once more below ground. Before they can do that, though, they may find that they've taken their place in the food chain. Spiny mice are very partial to cool, refreshing snails. Golden spiny mice are active by day, taking the place of the nocturnal common spiny mice. Beneath their fur, their skin is black to protect them against sunburn. But curiously enough, if the common mice are removed from an area, the golden mice immediately take over the night shift, showing that they would be nocturnal if they could, without competition from the common mice. The golden eagles have hatched 3 chicks, and the eaglets are now 3 weeks old. Their parents feed them on the abundance of the desert, mostly partridges, but also wild piglets, desert rats, and golden spiny mice. If they were nocturnal, the golden mice would avoid the eagles, but then they would be in the domain of the Negev viper. Some animals are just born to be prey. The eagles have the cliffs to themselves at this time of year. But now that the rains are over and the weather is warming up, the time left to them is short. They don't know it, but they're well advised to feed their young as well and as quickly as they can. They take it in turns to bring in food, one parent guarding the nest while the other hunts. The eaglets are growing fast. Already they're exchanging their baby down for their first suit of real feathers. Other babies are growing up among the canyons. In galleries and caves along the cliff walls, the ibex have established nurseries, creches for the calves where they'll be safe from harm. Their mothers bring them here when they're tiny, and here they will stay until they're sure enough on their feet to avoid accidents. Each female comes to suckle her own, going off to feed herself when they've finished. She always approaches them from above to avoid the risk of them falling when they come out to greet her. The calves seem anxious to gain their freedom as soon as possible, with endless gymnastics as they find their feet along the cliff ledges. Their mothers show signs of tiring of all this bounding, boundless energy. Down in the valley, the watermelon harvest is coming to an end. Like the date harvest in the autumn, it will become a time of plenty for the ibex. When the packers have finished, there are always a few damaged or undersized fruit left in the fields. These are for the ibex, if they can find the way in. Before people made their impact on the region, the ibex would have fed close to the sanctuary of the cliffs at this time of year, either on the valley floor or the high plateau. But two things have changed that: overgrazing by Bedouin herds above and irrigation by Israelis below. Now the open plain is their chosen feeding place, where they wouldn't have dared venture 50 years ago. Many other things have changed, now that the desert is not only agricultural land, but also a popular place for recreation. Each canyon has always had just one pair of nesting crows in April, dominating the site and keeping out others. They're still there, but they've been joined by hundreds of non-nesting birds, for one simple reason. Climbers. They love the outdoors and they glory in the spring weather. The cliffs are a perfect place to practice their sport. But they bring with them not just youthful enthusiasm, but food. Crows have always lived alongside people and have very little fear of them. When the people come to them, of course they take every scrap on offer. Their population has boomed among the cliffs, to the detriment of the eagles. The eaglets are nearly fledged, and their parents are working hard to keep them fed. A large part of their diet now should be young partridges, but the booming crow population raids partridge nests all the time, so productivity among partridges is not what it was. The eagles have found a solution of sorts. They feed their young on baby crows. A sheet of plastic flapping in the base of the nest is further evidence of the impact of people. As for the crows, they interfere with the eagle's movements by continually mobbing them as they come and go. There never was any love lost between the two species. And the climbers have an effect too. Although they go nowhere near the eagle nests during the breeding season, they are there during the rest of the year, and so are the eagles, watching them. It's no wonder that some age-old eagle nest sites have been abandoned recently, when the birds see people around them during the spring and summer. Still, the endless procession of food comes into the nest. This is a fat sand rat, another of the desert's abundant sources of protein. But when the eagle arrives, there's only one chick at the nest. Its astonishment is plain to see. Where are the others? Another problem for the eagles is the use of the desert as a military training area. Helicopters pass up and down the canyons from time to time. Sometimes they drive the eagles off their eggs, and sometimes they cause the chicks to leave the nest before they're ready, even falling to their death on the rocks below. But these two were ready to leave. Their parents will feed them away from the nest while they finish learning to fly and start exploring their wonderful new world of freedom and security. For this is another thing that has changed in the desert, the attitude of people to predators. Once persecuted by shepherds whenever they were seen, wolves as well as eagles are now protected and even respected by the new breed of desert dweller. Early in the evening, this female has returned to the gazelle she killed last night. She sets out to drag it to her den, but finally decides that it's too heavy. She'll eat some of it and leave the rest for the ever-watchful vultures. Back at the den, there's a most unusual family. Normally, the dominant male mates with just one of the females, producing a single litter which the whole pack helps to rear. Here, there are two litters of slightly different ages. The male must have taken two mates. She might be one of them, but it's hard to be sure. All the adults cooperate in rearing all the cubs. Having eaten what she could, she'll have to hunt again tonight, perhaps for slightly smaller and more portable prey. The increase in cattle farming in the valley might be helping the wolves to survive, together with their protected status. Dusk sees the changing of the guard among the spiny mice. The common mice, the nocturnal ones, emerge in search of snails, which will be above the surface for another week or two yet. They have nothing to fear from the vipers. They're still hibernating, though it will not be very long before they resume hunting. Like most prey animals, the mice breed very quickly to maintain their numbers in the face of steady predation. At the end of the rains, their population is at a peak. It will need to be. The vipers are emerging. But the danger is not yet acute. They first have to molt before they start to hunt again. For the moment, the mice can watch one of the most amazing sights in nature, though they probably don't see it that way. The old skin has already split across the snake's head. It looks first for a suitable object to extend the split, so that it can get its head free. Now, jagged pebbles on the ground or convenient twigs will serve as anchor points, while the snake slowly walks out of its skin. The whole process takes 15 to 20 minutes before the snake emerges in a whole new skin for a new season. The old skin lies like a ghost on the desert floor. The hunter is on the prowl again. The mother wolf has also been hunting, and this time her kill is a more suitable size. She's not disturbed by a passing fox. He's much too small to pose a threat to her. She can feed at her leisure while the male keeps guard nearby. But when a potential rival flits past in the night, she takes her prey back to the den to share it with her cubs. At dawn, striped hyenas come down from the canyons looking for their share of the bounty. This young female has killed a gazelle, and although she's eaten part of it, the remains weigh at least 12 kilos, about the same as she does. Powerful neck muscles and long front legs are the hyena's adaptations for carrying heavy loads. As the sun rises, she'll take the carcass into cover to finish her meal. As always, the vultures are on the watch in case she abandons her task. A wise man once said that a rock in the desert is like a tree in a forest. Each one shelters a vast array of animals and plants, and without them the desert would be barren of life. These rocks are being removed from the desert. Human activity is increasing round the shores of the Dead Sea at a rate that could never have been predicted a decade ago. Around 1 million tourists come every year from overseas. The existing hotels have nearly 2,000 beds, of which 60% are occupied all year round. It's no wonder that there's great pressure to build new ones. Only 1 in 5 of the guests visit the desert. The rest might look in at the great archaeological sites like the fortress of Masada or Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, but most of the visitors to this huge new hotel will want mainly to visit the beach. The waters of the Dead Sea are rich in chemicals, the residue of countless centuries of evaporation. There is good medical evidence that they're useful as a treatment for a variety of skin complaints. Many, if not most, of the visitors here have come on the advice of their doctors, often financed by their medical insurance. Faced with these facts, the hotel industry has little interest in protecting the desert. The rich black sulphurous mud is supposed to beautify the skin even of those who are not diseased. Whether it does or not, shiny black is the look of the day down at the Dead Sea shore. It's a look the desert has been familiar with for some time. Then there's the sea itself. Everyone must have heard that the water is so dense that it's impossible to sink in it. The Roman historian Josephus Flavius recorded that the Emperor Vespasian tested the observation, though not in person. He selected all those of his men who could not swim, tied their hands behind their backs and had them thrown in. Nobody drowned, any more than they do today. As the day wears towards noon, the ibex above the beach are beginning to feel the heat. The herd has split up now, the females and young having formed groups separate from the males. They gather round the well while the males are on the cliffs above. Hyraxes are always here, but another visitor has come to exploit a different source of food. Tristram's grackles have discovered a way of life which is common in Africa but quite unexpected here. They feed on ticks from the coats of the ibex, just like oxpeckers on the African savannah, and the ibex are content to let them. Though there sometimes comes a point when the intrusion is just too much. Like some great heraldic beast, a lordly male sits in the shade of a rock. But even the lordly must succumb to the drowsy heat of the midday sun. Midday is the time when the thorny-tailed lizards are out and about. They seem immune to the heat, lumbering briskly about the desert floor in search of food and licking minerals from the rocks. Even more briskly move the off-road vehicles. Around 100,000 Israelis visit the desert every year. Most of them are walkers and do little or no damage, but the off-road enthusiasts make up for them with a vengeance. The golden eagle is the thorny-tail's only natural enemy in this desert, but it has no defense against these trampling monsters. Nor do the other desert animals when they try to cross the main road that runs the length of the valley. It now carries so much traffic day and night between the port of Eilat and the north that it has become a serious barrier to the movement of wildlife. And yet there's the other side of the equation. Much of the human activity in the valley has benefited the animals. A grove of grapefruit trees offers food and dappled shade to a group of male ibex when they most need it, in the heat of the day. The grapefruit growers don't mind the ibex browsing. There's plenty of tree they can't reach, and that's where the fruit grows. Back at David's well, people have taken a hand too. When the nearby kibbutz of Ein Gedi needed to take 2/3 of the water from this permanent spring for their own purposes, they built a retaining wall to keep the level high enough for the animals to use. One result has been that people can go to the well if they're quiet about it and watch the animals drinking, just a short stroll from the kibbutz buildings. At one time they would have been watched if they did. When prey animals drink, predators will not be far away. A healthy ibex can escape from a leopard by day if it can reach the cliffs. No leopard could follow where the ibex can go. One of the females gives a warning stamp. the herd takes to the cliffs, and the leopard goes to ground. At night time he's successful, grabbing an unwary male ibex from an unwise choice of sleeping place. Ein-Gedi was until recently famous for its leopards, but they have suffered a series of setbacks since 1990. One died of old age, another, also old and practically blind, was shot by a soldier it nearly bumped into, and a third was killed by a car. This is the last of the Ein-Gedi leopards, a healthy male. There may be as many as a dozen more in the desert, so they might once more return to David's well. The desert may have become crowded, bustling with the business of humanity, but it still has many corners where people never go. And there's still much that is wild among the evidence of civilization. Most of the Negev is a military zone with strictly limited access. The Dead Sea Valley is a national nature reserve where the interests of the wildlife come first. There is every reason to expect that the crowded desert and its remarkable wildlife, along with that of the rest of Israel, will survive for centuries to come.